Hey nerds. So, I'm going to explain Slavoj Zizek's claim that Hegel proves that life destroys itself. So, a lot of you know that my favorite Hegelian slash Lacanian slash Marxist philosopher is Slavoj Zizek, who wrote a book called about Hegel called Less Than Nothing that I've been doing a series on. And Hegel was, of course, an 18th and 19th century German idealist philosopher. And before we get into the paragraph here, I'm going to explain Slavoj Zizek's reversal of the Hegelian dialectic. Now, the dialectic is not actually a term that Hegel ever used, contrary to popular knowledge. Um, but he had ideas. I think it's in particularly his book, The Phenomenology of Spirit, that people interpret interpreted and started calling the dialectic, which is something like using using the logical flaws or problems in arguments in order to using them in combination with each other favorably in order to form new ideas. So using these contradictions and ideas in logical fallacies in order to use these ideas to combine these two ideas and create new ideas. So Slavoj Zizek's use of the Hegelian dialectic involves a reversal or negation of accepted views that can lead to a new understanding. So he's basically like being contrarian, questioning these obvious assumptions that we all assume are obvious. And he uses the reversal of the Hegelian dialectic to unsettle fixed categories and show how terms relate to each other. So, like he's saying, what does this category mean? Well, it actually means this. Sometimes he'll say it means the opposite of what other philosophers say it does, right? Because we know that Slavoj Zizek likes to be a shit disturber. So, but Slavoj Zizek, of course, adds his own twist to it, uh, where opposed terms are twisted together. So he takes these so in when he's examining arguments, he takes these terms that are assumed that are a priori, we could say, assumed to be true, and he examines them, examines these two, let's say, these assumptions and these conclusions of arguments together, and measures these conclusions of arguments and categories, twist them together in order to form like a backwards meaning, like almost deliberately misinterpreting the arguments of other philosophers in order to say that it's the opposite of that. So this is he's about to go into basically an example of what he does here that kind of explains his twist, his reversal of the Hegelian dialectic with a twist on it. So let's get into the paragraph here. Okay. How are we to counter? So he's responding to criticisms of Hegel and the Hegelian dialectic. Like I said, it's not actually a term that Hegel used, but philosophers use it all the time, and they use it based on ideas that he talked about that formed the dialectic that was used as a label of other philosophers put on Hegel. So, how are we to counter this diagnosis of the disease called Hegel? So, he got into severe criticisms of Hegel many times before in the book so far, right? So, how are we to counter this diagnosis of the disease called Hegel, which centers on the dialectical reversal as an empty formal gesture of presenting defeat as victory? So that's an example of how you can say a dialectical reversal, presenting defeat as victory, literally turning an assumed idea on its head, that defeat means victory. So, the first observation that imposes itself is that reading rational semantic choices as strategies for coping with obstacles to the assertion of life is in itself already a rational semantic choice. So, that's of course a mouthful there. So, if you're saying that rational semantic choices are used as strategies for coping with challenges in life, that in itself is a rational semantic choice. So it's a rational semantic choice to say that using rational semantic choices uh, allows us to cope with the obstacles in life. But more important is to note How such a reading subtly perpetuates a narrow view of Hegel, which obliterates many key dimensions of his thought. Yeah, that's kind of oversimplifying Hegel, because as I alluded to before, his idea of the dialectic and even the reversal of the dialectic is far more simplified than the way he describes the ideas that other philosophers label as the dialectic and phenomenology of spirit in his other work as well. Okay, so he continues. Is it not possible to read Hegel's systematic sublation of each and every shape of consciousness or social life form as precisely a description of all possible forms with their vital semantic choices and their inherent antagonisms? So basically, he's saying that other philosophers are mistaken if he's trying to like lay out his worldview in terms of the way life works and the way we deal with challenges in life. Hegel wasn't laying out his worldview that answers all of these questions in very specific ways and talks about specific rational semantic choices and specific ways that we deal with specific problems in life. He was more general and deliberately like ambiguous in some ways as that, because many aspects of life are ambiguous and unpredictable, right? So if there is a semantic choice that underlies Hegel's thought, it is not the desperate wager that retroactively one will be able to tell a consistent, all encompassing, and meaningful story in which every detail will be allotted its proper place, but on the contrary, the weird certainty, comparable to the psychoanalyst's certainty that the repressed will always return, that a symptom will always spoil every figure of harmony. So that's in brackets there. It's not necessarily referring to Lacan, who's obviously calls himself a Lacanian in reference to the famous psychoanalyst Lacan. And I don't know whether he's I don't know if about enough about Lacan to know whether he's referring to a specific idea of Lacan there, but he often mentions Lacan's ideas as he often does with Hegel, since like I said, he's a Hegelian and Lacanian. So anyway, so like he's saying there, he's actually saying, contrary to the popular belief of other philosophers, uh Hegel, you can actually say there's a certainty that there are going to be a lot of unpredictable factors, and there's a very ambiguous nature in terms of specific details of life. So, with every figure of consciousness or form, oh, okay. So they're basically, uh, Zizek's explaining that Hegel is saying that with every figure of consciousness or form of life, things will always somehow go wrong, that each position will generate an excess which will augur its self-destruction. So I really like that. So that's how Zizek is explaining Hegel's argument that life inevitably destroys itself. So he's saying that basically Zizek is explaining that Hegel's saying that we form rational semantic arguments in order to deal with challenges in life. And the way that we form rational semantic arguments in order to deal with semantic choices in life leads to life inevitably destroying itself.